morning air outside the Dirksen Senate office building was thick with the humidity of a Washington summer and the electric tension of a political circus. By 8:00 a.m., the sidewalks were already impassable. A sea of protesters had gathered, their chants echoing off the marble facades of Capitol Hill. On one side, progressive activists held signs reading, "Stop the Witch Hunt," and "I stand with Ilhan," their voices amplified by megaphones, decrying what they called a racially motivated attack on a barrier-breaking congresswoman. On the other side, conservative groups waved flags and demanded accountability, their placards referencing marriage certificates and tax fraud. It was the kind of chaotic, polarized spectacle that cable news networks thrived on, a perfect storm of identity politics and partisan rage. Inside the hearing room of the Senate Judiciary Committee, however, the atmosphere was strikingly different. It was cold, sterile, and terrifyingly quiet. The air conditioning hummed with a low industrial drone, scrubbing the air of the humidity and the noise from the street below. This was a room designed for gravity, for the serious business of the state, where careers were made and destroyed not by shouting matches, but by the stroke of a pen and the entry of a record into the Congressional Archive. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, Representative Ilhan Omar entered the room. She walked with the confident stride of a politician who had survived countless news cycles and Twitter storms. She was flanked by 3 high-priced attorneys from a major D.C. firm, men in sharp suits, carrying leather briefcases that cost more than most Americans' monthly mortgage payments. Omar looked prepared for a fight, but she was prepared for the wrong fight. She had spent the last week in strategy sessions that treated this hearing like a cable news appearance. Her team had prepared sound bites about Islamophobia, racism, and the historic nature of her position. They had crafted deflections and pivots, counting on the usual chaotic rhythm of a congressional committee to allow her to filibuster her way out of trouble. She believed that if she could paint the accusers as bigots, the accusations themselves would evaporate in the heat of the cultural battle. She took her seat at the witness table, her legal team arranging binders and whispering last-minute advice. She scanned the raised dais where the senators sat, her eyes landing briefly on the nameplate of the man who would be leading the questioning, Senator John Kennedy. To the casual observer, and perhaps to Omar herself, John Kennedy looked harmless. With his shock of white hair, his slightly rumpled suit, and his oversized reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, he resembled a kindly small-town pharmacist or a grandfather ready to tell a fishing story. He spoke with a slow, deliberate Louisiana drawl that seemed to drip with molasses, disarming and folksy. He was known for his aw shucks metaphors about his mama and his dogs, a character that the D.C. elite often mistook for simplicity. But that persona was the most dangerous weapon in the United States Senate. Ilhan Omar had made the fatal mistake of confusing the mask for the man. She had forgotten, or perhaps simply ignored, the reality of who was sitting across from her. John Kennedy was not a country bumpkin. He was a predator in a seersucker suit. He held a bachelor's degree from Vanderbilt University, a law degree from the University of Virginia, and, most critically, a Bachelor of Civil Law degree from Oxford University, where he had studied as a Rhodes Scholar, graduating with first-class honors. While Omar's team was prepping talking points for Twitter, Kennedy had been preparing for a trial. For 3 weeks, the senator had sequestered himself with a team of forensic accountants and immigration attorneys. This wasn't about politics for him. It was about the law. He had personally reviewed every single document the committee had subpoenaed. He had traced the timelines of marriages and divorces, cross-referencing them with flight logs and social media archives. He had studied the Minnesota campaign finance laws and federal tax codes. Kennedy sat in his chair, second from the left, reviewing his notes one final time. His binder wasn't filled with speeches. It was filled with traps. He had prepared over 200 questions, categorized by topic: immigration, tax fraud, campaign finance, perjury. Each question was designed to act as a steel gate, slamming shut the moment the witness tried to back away. He had anticipated every objection her lawyers would make and had a citation ready to overrule them. He had consulted with federal prosecutors to ensure that his questions laid the specific groundwork for a perjury indictment. He looked up over his reading glasses at Omar. He didn't sneer. He didn't scowl. He offered a polite, almost warm smile. It was the smile of a man who knows exactly how the movie ends because he wrote the script. The sharks in the ocean don't need to roar. They just need to bite. And John Kennedy was ready to feed. The room fell silent as Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley banged the gavel. The theater of public opinion was closed. The court of law was now in session. Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley read the opening statement with the dry, monotone delivery of a man who had seen everything the Senate had to offer. He outlined the gravity of the allegations: immigration fraud, tax fraud, perjury, and misuse of campaign funds. He reminded the room, and specifically the witness, that this was a formal proceeding of the United States Senate. "Witness testimony is under oath," Grassley droned, looking over his spectacles. "Lying to Congress is a federal felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison." The warning hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Then Grassley turned to his left. "Senator Kennedy, you may begin your examination of the witness." The room seemed to hold its breath. Senator Kennedy leaned into his microphone, adjusting it slowly. He smiled that signature Louisiana smile, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look like he was about to offer you a glass of sweet tea on a porch in Baton Rouge. "Ms. Omar," Kennedy began, his voice a slow, melodic drawl, "thank you so much for being here today. I know you are a busy woman, and this is inconvenient, and I do appreciate your time." It was a master class in disarming a hostile witness. Omar blinked, perhaps expecting an immediate attack. Her lead attorney leaned in, whispering something urgent. Omar nodded, straightened her posture, and spoke into her microphone, her voice sharp and defensive. "Senator, I want to state for the record that this entire hearing is a witch hunt against a Muslim woman of color," she declared, reciting the lines her team had rehearsed. "This is political persecution designed to silence a progressive voice and distract from the real issues facing this country." Kennedy didn't interrupt her. He let her finish. He let the rhetoric fill the room. And then, with the gentle patience of a teacher correcting a wayward student, he dismantled it. "Ma'am," Kennedy said softly, "I appreciate your perspective, but you are under oath today. We're just going to stick to the facts, if that's all right with you. You understand you are under oath, correct?" "Yes," Omar replied, "but this entire proceeding is—" "I just need a yes or no, ma'am," Kennedy interrupted, his voice hardening just a fraction. "You are under oath, correct?" Omar's attorney nudged her leg under the table. She swallowed. "Yes." "Wonderful," Kennedy beamed. "So, you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, just like you swore when you raised your hand a moment ago?" "Of course," Omar snapped, "but I want to state, yes or no, ma'am. Will you tell the truth?" "Yes." "Perfect," Kennedy said, leaning back. See? That wasn't hard at all. Now we can have a nice, productive conversation. Kennedy reached for the first folder on his desk. It was labeled Part 1, 9/11. He opened it with deliberate slowness. Ms. Omar, on March 23, 2019, you gave a speech at a CARE event in Los Angeles. Do you remember that speech? I have given many speeches, Senator, she deflected. This specific one, ma'am, at CARE, March 23, 2019. Do you recall it? I believe so. Good, Kennedy said. I'm going to play a short clip from that speech, just to refresh everyone's memory. He nodded to the technician. The large screens positioned around the hearing room flickered to life. The footage showed Ilhan Omar at the podium, speaking with passion about the founding of the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Her voice boomed through the quiet Senate chamber. CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. The clip ended. The screen went black. The phrase, "some people did something," seemed to echo in the silence that followed. It was dismissive, vague, and to many in the room, deeply offensive. Kennedy looked down at his notes for a long moment, letting the silence do the work for him. Then he looked up at Omar. Did you say those words, ma'am? Some people did something. That quote has been taken completely out of context, Omar shot back immediately. Ma'am, I'm not asking about context right now, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a serious register. Did those words come out of your mouth? Yes or no? Omar glanced at her attorneys. She was trapped. The video was right there. To deny it would be immediate perjury. Yes, she admitted. But the full context. Thank you. That's all I needed, Kennedy said. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder. On September 11, 2001, 2,777 Americans were murdered by terrorists affiliated with Al-Qaeda. That is a fact, correct? 19 hijackers, 4 commercial airplanes, attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, where brave passengers fought back and died. All facts, yes? And you characterized this event, the deadliest terrorist attack in world history, as some people did something. Is that a fair characterization, Ms. Omar? I was discussing civil liberties in the aftermath, she insisted. Yes or no, ma'am? Kennedy pressed. You called the murder of nearly 3,000 Americans. Some people did something. Did you or didn't you? I used those words. Yes. Kennedy pulled out a thicker document now. He put on his reading glasses. Stephen Adams, Gordon Amos, Edelmiro Abad, Paul Acquaviva, Christian Adams. He read the names slowly, reverently. He looked up. These are just the first 5 names, alphabetically, of the 2,977 Americans who were murdered that day. These are the some people who had something done to them. He looked directly at Omar, his eyes devoid of the earlier warmth. Do you stand by that characterization of their murder, ma'am? The context of my speech was about how Muslims were treated, Omar argued, her voice rising. I asked if you stand by calling their murder, some people did something. Yes or no? Her attorneys were whispering frantically. She looked cornered. The characterization was imprecise. Imprecise? Kennedy repeated the word, tasting it. That is an interesting word for minimizing mass murder. He closed the folder gently. Ms. Omar, you came to America as a refugee when you were 12 years old. Is that correct? Your family fled war, violence, chaos. You came to America seeking safety and opportunity, correct? And America gave that to you, Kennedy said softly. America gave your family refuge. America gave you protection. America gave you an education, and eventually, America gave you the opportunity to become a member of the United States Congress. All correct? Kennedy shook his head, looking more disappointed than angry. And you can't properly honor 2,977 murdered Americans without minimizing their deaths as some people did something. He paused, letting the weight of the moral indictment land. Ma'am, I'm just a simple man from Louisiana. But where I come from, we call that ingratitude. And under oath, that is now part of the permanent congressional record. Kennedy didn't wait for a response. He simply reached for the next folder, leaving the charge of ingratitude hanging over the witness table like a shroud. The trap had been sprung, and the first blow had landed. Senator Kennedy watched Ilhan Omar for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had established the moral baseline with the 9/11 questioning, stripping away her ability to claim the high ground of victimhood. Now, he was moving from moral failings to criminal liability. He reached under the table and pulled out a new folder. This one was significantly thicker than the last, bulging with documents that had been meticulously tabbed and highlighted. It hit the mahogany table with a heavy, dull thud that seemed to vibrate through the microphone. "Now, Ms. Omar," Kennedy said, his voice shifting to a more businesslike tone, though still wrapped in that deceptive Louisiana drawl. "Let's discuss your marriages, plural." Omar's attorneys immediately leaned in, their bodies forming a protective shell around her. One whispered frantically in her ear, while the other scribbled a note. Omar nodded, straightened her jacket, and spoke firmly into the microphone. "Senator, my personal life is not relevant to this committee's purview. These are private family matters, and I will not—" "Ma'am," Kennedy interrupted, his voice dripping with exaggerated patience, like a grandfather explaining gravity to a toddler. "You are testifying at a Senate hearing titled Immigration Fraud. Your marriages are not just personal life when they involve the United States government. They are the central evidence. Your marriages are absolutely relevant to immigration fraud allegations. Wouldn't you agree?" It was a rhetorical trap. If she agreed, she opened the door. If she disagreed, she looked like she was hiding something. She stayed silent. "I'll take that as a yes," Kennedy smiled. "Let's look at the timeline." He signaled the technician. A document appeared on the screens. A marriage license. "You entered into a legal marriage with a British citizen named Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmeh on February 12, 2009, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Is that correct?" Omar hesitated. "This is a private matter." "It is a public record, ma'am," Kennedy corrected gently. "It is a marriage license filed with the state. Yes or no? Did you legally marry Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmeh in 2009? Her lead attorney whispered in her ear for nearly 30 seconds. The room waited. Finally, she answered, her voice tight. "Yes." "Thank you," Kennedy said. "Now, at that time, in 2009, were you in a relationship with a different man, Ahmed Hirsi?" "I was separated from—" "Yes or no, ma'am?" Kennedy pressed. "Were you in a romantic relationship and living with Ahmed Hirsi, the father of your children, while you were legally married to Mr. Elmeh?" Another consultation with attorneys. The air in the room was getting stifling. "And during your legal marriage to Mr. Elm, you had children with Mr. Hirsi, correct?" Kennedy nodded slowly. He pulled out a new stack of documents. These weren't government forms. They were photographs. "These are photographs that were publicly available on social media, Instagram and Facebook, before they were deleted," Kennedy explained. "They show you and Mr. Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmeh together." The images appeared on the screens. They didn't look like wedding photos. They looked like family photos. There was a young Omar and a young Elmi, looking remarkably similar, standing in what appeared to be the same household, years before the 2009 marriage. "Do you recognize these photos, Ms. Omar?" I don't recall those specific images," she stammered. "Ma'am, is that you in these photographs? Yes or no?" "It appears to be, but—" "Thank you." Kennedy moved on relentlessly. He pulled out a document that looked old, its edges scanned and digitalized. "These are school records from Somalia," Kennedy announced. "They list you, Ilhan Omar, and Ahmed Nur Saeed Elme. And interestingly enough, they list the exact same father for both of you. The exact same parents." The room went deadly silent. The press gallery leaned forward as one. This was the accusation that had swirled in the dark corners of the internet for years, dismissed as conspiracy theory. Kennedy was putting it on the Senate record. "Do you recognize these records?" "Those records are—" "I don't have independent verification of those," she deflected, her voice shaking slightly. "The records list the same parents for both you and Mr. Elmi," Kennedy said, peering over his glasses. "Yes or no? According to those documents, is that what they say?" "According to those documents, yes," she admitted, emphasizing the distance between herself and the evidence. Kennedy pulled out one last stack, printed social media posts. "These are archived posts from your own family members," Kennedy said, "before they were scrubbed from the internet. In these posts, members of your family refer to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elme as your brother. Not your husband, your brother. Did members of your family refer to him as your brother on social media?" "I can't control what others post," she snapped. "Did they or didn't they, ma'am?" "Some posts may have used that terminology in a cultural sense," she equivocated. Kennedy set down all the documents. He took off his reading glasses and folded them on the table. He looked directly at Ilhan Omar. The aw-shucks demeanor was gone. The Rhodes Scholar was staring right through her. "Ms. Omar," Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. "I am going to ask you a direct question, and I remind you that you are under federal oath. Lying to this committee is perjury." He paused, letting the threat hang there. "Is Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi your biological brother?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and excruciatingly long. Omar's 3 attorneys huddled around her instantly. The whispering was frantic. Omar's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a friendly face, looking for the cameras to stop rolling. But the red lights stayed on. 10 seconds passed. 20. 45. The silence stretched to a full 90 seconds. In television time, that is an eternity. In a hearing room, it is a confession. Finally, Omar pulled away from her lawyers. She leaned into the microphone. She didn't look at Kennedy. She looked down at the table. "I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me," she said quietly, "and I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights." Kennedy didn't look surprised. He didn't gasp. He looked satisfied, like a mathematician who had just balanced a complex equation. "Let the record show," Kennedy said, his voice booming, "that the witness has invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in response to the question of whether the man she married, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elme, is her biological brother." He made a deliberate note on his legal pad. The trap had snapped shut. Senator Kennedy watched Ilhan Omar carefully as the echo of her Fifth Amendment plea faded. He knew exactly what had just happened. In a criminal court, A jury isn't allowed to infer guilt from silence. But this was a congressional hearing. This was the court of public opinion. And in the eyes of the law, pleading the fifth isn't saying, "I didn't do it." It is saying, "If I tell you the truth, I will go to jail." Kennedy picked up his pen and tapped it rhythmically against his binder. "Ms. Omar," Kennedy said, his voice deceptively casual again, "I've been practicing law for over 40 years. In Louisiana, we have a saying, 'The Fifth Amendment is the truth's last hiding place.' Innocent people don't need to hide from the truth. They don't plead the fifth to simple yes or no questions about the basic facts of their lives. Unless, of course, the facts are crimes." He flipped a page in his binder. "Now that we've established you won't answer questions about your brother, let's look at the domino effect of that silence. Because if you married your brother, Ms. Omar, that isn't just a social taboo. It creates a web of federal felonies." Kennedy pulled out a tax document. "You filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hirsi in 2014 and 2015, Kennedy stated. "But at that time, you were still legally married to Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi. Is that correct?" Omar looked at her lawyers. The path had been set. Once you plead the fifth on the foundation, you have to plead it on the entire structure. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right," she said. "Interesting," Kennedy noted, "because filing a joint return with a person you are not legally married to, while married to someone else, is tax fraud. That's a felony." He pulled out another sheet. "You were fined $3,160 by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board for violations related to improper tax filings," Kennedy said. "That is a matter of public record. You paid the fine, correct?" "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right." "So you won't even admit to a fine you already paid?" Kennedy asked, raising an eyebrow. "That tells me you are worried about the federal implications. You see, the Minnesota fine was a slap on the wrist. But federal tax fraud? That carries up to 5 years in prison." Kennedy moved to the next tab in his binder. Immigration. "Let's go back to Mr. Elmi," Kennedy said. "The man you won't say is your brother. The man you legally married. Did you marry Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi for the sole purpose of assisting him with his immigration status in the United States?" This was the heart of the hearing. Immigration marriage fraud. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right," Omar repeated, her voice becoming robotic. "Did Mr. Elmi attend North Dakota State University using student loans obtained through this marriage status? Did you knowingly make false statements on federal immigration forms regarding your relationship to Mr. Elmi?" Kennedy leaned back, spreading his hands wide. "Ms. Omar, this is an avalanche," Kennedy observed. "You aren't just refusing to answer one question. You are refusing to answer any question that touches on the legality of your life in this country." He pulled out a formal-looking document on heavy bond paper. "You have now invoked the Fifth Amendment on questions about whether Elmi is your brother. You have invoked it on your tax filings. You have invoked it on potential immigration fraud." Kennedy looked directly into the camera lens. "This committee has a duty," Kennedy said solemnly. "We are not a court of law, but we are fact-finders. And the fact is, the witness refuses to deny the allegations under oath. Therefore," Kennedy announced, "I am stating for the record that this committee will forward its findings, including your refusal to answer, to the Department of Justice for a formal investigation into potential immigration fraud, tax fraud, and perjury." He looked back at Omar. She looked small, diminished, stripped of the bravado she had walked in with. "The American people deserve answers, Ms. Omar," Kennedy said. They deserve to know if a sitting member of Congress committed fraud to get her brother into the country. They deserve to know if you cheated on your taxes. Under oath, you have refused to give them those answers, Kennedy said. But your refusal speaks louder than any answer you could have given. In the law, we call that an adverse inference. In plain English, it means you got caught. Kennedy closed the brother folder and the tax folder. He moved them to the side of the table, forming a stack of unanswered accusations. But we aren't done yet, Kennedy said, reaching for a new folder. Because if you are willing to defraud the government for your family, I have to wonder, what exactly are your views on the country you are supposed to be serving? He opened the folder labeled Anti-Semitism and Loyalty. Let's discuss your statements about Jewish Americans, shall we? Omar stiffened. The legal trap had closed. Now, the political destruction was about to begin. Senator Kennedy allowed the silence of the Fifth Amendment pleas to settle over the room like dust. He knew the legal damage was done. The referrals to the DOJ and IRS were now inevitable. But he wasn't just building a legal case. He was building a moral one. He reached for the folder labeled Anti-Semitism and Loyalty and opened it with slow, deliberate movements. Ms. Omar, Kennedy began, his tone shifting from inquisitor to disappointed elder statesman. Let's discuss your statements about Jewish Americans, because words have meaning, especially when they come from a member of Congress. Omar's posture stiffened immediately. This was ground she felt more comfortable defending. She leaned into the microphone. I was criticizing Israeli government policy, Senator, not the Jewish people. Criticizing a government is not— Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, holding up a hand. I'm not asking for the spin. I have your tweets right here. Let's read them together, and let the committee decide what exactly you were criticizing. He signaled the technician. The screens changed, displaying a tweet from February 10th, 2019. It was blown up to massive size, the text undeniable. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. Kennedy peered over his reading glasses. Did you send that tweet, Ms. Omar? Yes, she said quickly, but just yes or no, please. Yes? This was in response to a question about why American politicians support Israel, Kennedy noted. You were suggesting that support for Israel is bought, that it isn't based on shared values or national security. It is bought with money, correct? I was criticizing AIPAC's lobbying influence, she argued. Yes or no, ma'am, Kennedy pressed. Were you suggesting money buys political support for Israel? Yes? Kennedy nodded. The screen changed again. This time, a tweet from November 16, 2012. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Did you tweet that, Ms. Omar? Yes, but I was young, she deflected. I didn't understand the historical context of the word hypnotized. You were 30 years old, ma'am, Kennedy deadpanned. You weren't a teenager. Did you tweet it? Yes or no? Kennedy pulled a document from the folder, a formal congressional resolution. On March 7, 2019, the U.S. House of Representatives, your own chamber, controlled by your own party, passed House Resolution 183, a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. Do you recall that? This resolution was a direct response to your statements, correct? Omar glanced at her attorneys. To deny it would be absurd. It was front-page news. The resolution addressed many forms of hatred, Senator. Ma'am, Kennedy said, his voice sharpening, was your anti-Semitism the catalyst for this resolution? Yes or no? A long pause. It was mentioned in the context. Yes. So your own party, Democrats, not Republicans, felt compelled to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism because of your statements, correct? And this happened twice, Kennedy noted. Two separate occasions where your own party condemned you, correct? Kennedy set the paper down and looked at her. Ms. Omar, Jewish refugees came to America fleeing the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered in Europe. These are facts, correct? They were murdered because of conspiracy theories, Kennedy said quietly. Conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world with money. Conspiracy theories about Jews having mystical power to hypnotize the world. He pointed at the screen. The exact same conspiracy theories you promoted in your tweets. Would you agree that is the same type of anti-Semitic language? I disagree with that characterization, she said stubbornly. Your own party agreed with it twice, Kennedy shot back. They passed resolutions condemning it, correct? She was trapped by her previous admission. Yes, Kennedy leaned forward. Ms. Omar, you came to America as a refugee fleeing persecution. Jewish refugees came here fleeing genocide, and you attacked them using the language of their murderers. He paused, letting the weight of that statement land. Under oath, I am asking you, have you apologized to the Jewish community for spreading these anti-Semitic tropes? I issued statements clarifying my intent, she evaded. Have you apologized? Kennedy asked again. Yes or no? I expressed regret for how my words were received. That isn't an apology, ma'am, Kennedy said. That is deflection. That is saying, I'm sorry you were offended. Not, I'm sorry I said it. Under oath, have you apologized for the anti-Semitism itself? She stayed silent for a moment, realizing the corner she was in. No. Let the record reflect, Kennedy announced, that the witness, under oath, admits she has not apologized for anti-Semitic statements that her own party condemned twice. Kennedy closed the folder. The moral indictment was complete. Now, he was ready to pivot back to the money. Senator Kennedy watched the anti-Semitism folder join the stack of damning evidence. He reached for the next one, labeled Campaign Finance and Ethics. This was the part of the hearing that moved from ideological battles to cold, hard cash. Ms. Omar, Kennedy said, his voice crisp. Let's talk about where your campaign money goes. Because when donors give you money, they expect it to be used for politics, not personal life. He pulled out a stack of Federal Election Commission (FEC) reports. Your campaign paid a consulting firm called the E Street Group approximately $2.8 million. Is that correct? Omar shifted. Campaign expenditures are public record and legal, Senator. I asked if the amount is correct, Kennedy said. $2.8 million. Yes or no? Approximately, yes. The E Street Group is owned by a man named Tim Minette, correct? And you married Tim Minette on March 11, 2020, correct? Kennedy nodded. Now, let's look at the timeline, because the timeline is interesting. He pulled out a court document. On August 27, 2019, Beth Minette, Tim Minette's wife at the time, filed for divorce. In her legal filing, she stated, and I quote, "Defendant's more recent travel and long work hours now appear to be more related to his affair with Reper Ilhan Omar?" Kennedy looked up. Were you having an affair with Tim Minette while he was married and working for your campaign? Omar's attorneys were whispering urgently. This was dangerous territory. Admitting to an affair wasn't a crime, but using campaign funds to facilitate it could be. Kennedy didn't blink. Let the record show the witness has invoked the fifth on the question of whether she had an affair with her now husband while he was working for her campaign. He looked back at the FEC reports. During the period that you were allegedly having this affair, before you were married, your campaign paid Mr. Meinetz's firm $780,000 for travel expenses. Is that correct? $1.2 million for consulting fees, Kennedy read from the list. $650,000 for media production? Kennedy leaned forward, his expression hardening. Ms. Omar, you are invoking the Fifth Amendment on questions about payments to your lover's firm. Do you understand how that looks to the American people? I am exercising my constitutional rights, she replied robotically. Indeed you are, Kennedy agreed. And every time you do, it raises a question. Why can't you just say no? Why can't you say, the money was for legitimate work? Because if you say it, and we prove the money was for romantic getaways, that is perjury, Kennedy answered for her, and that is wire fraud, and that is conversion of campaign funds. He pulled out one last document in this section. The Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board fined you $3,260 in 2019, Kennedy noted. This was one of the largest fines ever levied against a sitting House member, correct? This fine was for multiple violations, including using campaign funds for personal travel and personal tax preparation services, correct? The finding was nuanced, she tried. Yes or no, ma'am, Kennedy insisted. Was personal use of funds part of the violation? She paused. To deny the official finding would be perjury. To admit it would confirm the pattern. Kennedy sat back, shaking his head. Let me summarize for the record, Kennedy said. Under oath, you have admitted your campaign paid your husband's firm nearly $3 million. You married him shortly after his wife accused you of an affair. You have already been fined for using campaign funds for personal expenses. And now, you invoke the Fifth Amendment when asked if the millions you sent to your husband were also for personal use. He looked at the cameras. Where I come from, we call that a family business built on donor money. This committee will refer these findings to the Federal Election Commission for a full audit and investigation, Kennedy announced. Because $2.8 million is a lot of money to pay for consulting when you are refusing to answer questions about what exactly was being consulted on. Kennedy closed the folder. The picture was becoming clearer with every question. A pattern of mixing personal life, family members, and money, all shielded by a wall of Fifth Amendment silence. But the most damaging questions were still to come. Senator Kennedy watched the stack of files grow on the table. The marriage fraud, the tax evasion, the campaign finance violations. Each folder represented a cracked pillar in the facade of Ilhan Omar's public image. But Kennedy knew that for many Americans, financial corruption was expected of politicians. It was cynical, but true. To truly dismantle the narrative of the patriotic progressive, he had to go deeper. He had to touch the third rail of politics: loyalty. He reached for the folder labeled National Security and Oath. It was thin, but its contents were radioactive. Ms. Omar, Kennedy said, his voice dropping the inquisitorial edge and adopting a tone of genuine curiosity. We've talked about your money, and we've talked about your family. Now, I want to talk about your country. He signaled to the audiovisual technician. Please play clip number 4. The large screens in the hearing room flickered to life. The footage showed Ilhan Omar sitting in a studio chair, giving an interview about her college experience and the perception of terrorism. She looked relaxed, speaking with her hands. As the professor mentioned Al-Qaeda, the video Omar said, lifting her hands to make exaggerated air quotes with her fingers. And Hezbollah, she continued, repeating the gesture. I was laughing because... The clip ended. The image froze on Omar with her fingers hooked in the air, framing the names of terrorist organizations as if they were ironic nicknames rather than lethal realities. Kennedy looked at the frozen image, then at Omar. "Ms. Omar, we just watched you make air quotes when saying the names Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. Did you make those gestures? Yes or no?" The context of that interview was about how those groups are perceived in academia, Omar argued, shifting in her seat. The video speaks for itself. "It certainly does, ma'am," Kennedy agreed pleasantly. "But for the record, did you make air quotes? Yes or no?" Kennedy nodded. He picked up a sheet of paper. "Al-Qaeda killed 2,977 Americans on September 11, 2001. We have already established that, correct? Hezbollah killed 241 United States Marines in the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983, correct? These are designated foreign terrorist organizations by the United States government, correct?" Kennedy took off his reading glasses and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And yet, you made air quotes about them. You used a gesture that universally implies irony or skepticism or so-called. You suggested, with your hands, that they aren't really terrorists, that they aren't really enemies." "I was discussing the complexity of language," she deflected. "Ma'am, you don't use air quotes for mass murderers unless you don't believe they are murderers," Kennedy said flatly. "You don't see people making air quotes about the Nazis. You don't see people making air quotes about the KKK." He moved on before she could pivot again. "Let's look at another clip. Clip number 5, please." The screen changed. This time the footage was grainier, shot on a phone or a handheld camera. It showed Ilhan Omar standing on a stage, addressing a large crowd of Somali Americans. She was speaking in Somali, her voice passionate and loud. Kennedy picked up a certified translation document. "This is from August 2022, Kennedy noted. "You traveled to Somalia, correct? During this speech, you said, and I am reading from the certified translation here, 'Ask us what country we are from.' And then you proceeded to talk about Somali identity. Did you say that?" "I was speaking to the diaspora about our shared heritage," she said. "Did you say, 'Ask us what country we are from?' Yes or no?" Kennedy looked down at his notes. "You didn't say, 'I am an American.' You didn't say, 'I represent Minnesota.' You didn't say, 'I am a member of the United States Congress.' You told people to ask what country you are from, implying that your primary identity, your heart, is Somali, not American." "That is a mischaracterization of cultural pride," she snapped. "I'm just reading your words, ma'am," Kennedy replied coolly. "Did you say them or not?" Kennedy sat back. He picked up a small, pocket-sized booklet. It was the Constitution of the United States. "Ms. Omar, when you were sworn into Congress on January 3, 2019, you took an oath, correct? You placed your hand on a book. I believe you used a Quran. And you raised your right hand. And you swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Correct? Al-Qaeda is a foreign enemy of the United States. Correct? Hezbollah is a foreign enemy of the United States. Correct? But you made air quotes about them, Kennedy reminded her. You minimized them. You treated them like a joke. Kennedy's voice dropped to a whisper, forcing the entire room to lean in. And you identify primarily with a foreign nation in your speeches. So I have to ask you, Ms. Omar, have you honored your oath? The room went deadly silent. This was the most dangerous question a sitting politician could face. I believe I have honored my oath, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You believe you have? Kennedy repeated. You aren't certain? I have done my best to— It is a yes or no question, ma'am, Kennedy said, his voice hardening. Have you honored your oath to defend the United States against its enemies? The enemies you make air quotes about? Yes or no? Her attorneys were frantic now. To say yes opened her up to perjury charges based on her public statements supporting these groups. To say no was political suicide. She looked at Kennedy. She looked at the cameras. She looked at the exit. I invoke my Fifth Amendment right, she said quietly. The gasp in the room was audible. A sitting member of the United States Congress, a woman with high-level security clearance, had just pleaded the Fifth Amendment when asked if she had honored her oath to defend the country. Kennedy let the moment hang there for a long time. He didn't need to shout. The silence screamed. Let the record show, Kennedy said, his voice grave, that when asked if she has honored her oath to defend America against its enemies, the witness invoked the Fifth Amendment. I'm just a country lawyer, Kennedy added, but that sounds an awful lot like divided loyalty to me. This committee will note these concerns in its final report to the FBI for a counterintelligence review. The air in the room was toxic. The accusation of divided loyalty hung over the witness table like a dark cloud. But Senator Kennedy wasn't finished. He had dismantled her legal standing and her patriotism. Now, he was going to dismantle her character. He opened the final folder in his stack. It was labeled Character and Conduct. Ms. Omar, Kennedy said, his tone shifting from grave to disappointed. We've talked about high crimes and misdemeanors. We've talked about treason and fraud. But sometimes, character is revealed in the small things, in how we treat the people we claim to love. He pulled out a series of printed social media posts. In September 2020, you posted on Twitter about your grandmother in Puerto Rico. Do you recall those posts? Yes, Omar said, looking wary. Her home had been damaged by Hurricane Maria. You posted photos of the damage. You discussed her living conditions, blue tarps on the roof, water damage, difficult circumstances. Correct? And you used these photos to criticize the federal response and President Donald Trump. You used your grandmother's suffering to score political points, correct? I was highlighting the failure of the administration to help the people of Puerto Rico, she argued. Yes or no, ma'am? Did you use photos of your grandmother's damaged home to criticize the president? Kennedy nodded. He signaled the screen again. An image appeared, a GoFundMe page. Now, here is where the story gets interesting, Kennedy said. In response to your posts, a conservative commentator named Matt Walsh saw the photos. And regardless of politics, he decided to do something. He organized a GoFundMe campaign to help repair your grandmother's home. Kennedy pointed to the total on the screen. 1,453. That is how much was raised, Kennedy said. In just a few days. Real money from real Americans, most of them conservatives, who wanted to help an elderly woman fix her roof. Kennedy looked at Omar. This was cash, ready to go, correct? And your office released a statement rejecting this donation, correct? Omar shifted uncomfortably. She knew how this looked. Yes. Why? Kennedy asked simply. Why did you reject money that could have fixed your grandmother's roof? It was a political stunt, Omar spat. I didn't want to participate in a disingenuous attempt to— It was 14,153, ma'am, Kennedy interrupted. That isn't a stunt. That is lumber. That is shingles. That is labor. That is a dry roof for an old woman. Kennedy leaned forward. Did you reject the money? Has your grandmother's home been fully repaired since then? Omar hesitated. This was a trap. If she lied, he likely had photos. I am not certain of the current status. Yes or no, ma'am? Has it been fully repaired to the standard it would have been with that $14,000? Not to my knowledge, no. So, Kennedy summarized, your grandmother is still living in damaged conditions, or she lived in them longer than she had to. I believe so. Yes. Kennedy took off his glasses and set them on the table. He looked at her with an expression of genuine pity. Ms. Omar, you posted about your grandmother's suffering to score political points against Donald Trump. You used her pain for your platform. But then, when Americans, people you disagree with politically, stepped up and raised real money to actually help her, you rejected it. You rejected it because it came from the wrong kind of people. You put your political pride ahead of your grandmother's welfare, Kennedy said. You decided it was better for her to live under a blue tarp than for you to accept help from a conservative. He paused, letting the cruelty of that decision sink into the room. That is your own grandmother, ma'am. Your flesh and blood. The woman who raised you. Where I come from in Louisiana, Kennedy said softly, family comes before politics. Always. If my grandmother needed a roof, I wouldn't care if the money came from a Democrat, a Republican, or a Martian. I would fix the roof. But you didn't. Kennedy gathered the papers and placed them back in the folder. Under oath, you have admitted you rejected help for your own grandmother for political reasons. You let her suffer to maintain your political brand. That tells me everything I need to know about your character, Kennedy said. If you won't even help your own grandmother because of politics, why on earth would the American people trust you to help them? Let that be part of the permanent congressional record, Kennedy announced. Rejected $14,000 for grandmother. Admitted. He moved the folder to the stack. The legal case was airtight. The loyalty case was damning. But this, the character case, was the final nail in the coffin. He had stripped her of her humanity, leaving only a politician who cared more about Twitter arguments than her own family. Senator John Kennedy stood up slowly, the joints of his knees popping audibly in the quiet room. He didn't look triumphant. He looked weary, like a man who had just spent 4 hours cleaning out a flooded basement and finding nothing but rot. He spent a long moment organizing the folders on the mahogany table, stacking them with the meticulous care of a librarian. 9/11, brother, taxes, anti-Semitism, campaign cash, loyalty, grandmother, 7 folders, 7 pillars of a career, now dismantled and lying in a heap of paper. Ms. Omar, Kennedy said, his voice echoing slightly in the hushed chamber. We are almost finished. I know this has been a long morning, and I appreciate your patience. But before we adjourn, we need to tidy up the record. We need to understand exactly what has happened here today. He picked up the final document, a summary sheet he had been writing on throughout the hearing. When you walked into this room at 9:00 a.m., you were a sitting member of Congress with a pristine legal presumption of innocence. You had Twitter followers. You had celebrity endorsements. You had a narrative. Kennedy looked at her over the rim of his glasses. But now, at 1 p.m., we have something else. We have a sworn record. And facts, as they say, are stubborn things. Kennedy began to walk through the litany, his voice steady and rhythmic, hammering each point home like a nail into a coffin. Let's review what you have admitted to, or refused to deny, under the penalty of perjury. Number 1, you minimized the murder of 2,977 Americans on 9/11 as some people did something. Admitted. Number 2, You admitted to spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that were so severe your own party condemned you twice. You admitted you have never apologized for the anti-Semitism itself. Admitted. Number 3. When asked if the man you married, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmeh, is your biological brother, you invoked the Fifth Amendment. You refused to answer to avoid self-incrimination. Number 4. When asked if you committed immigration fraud to help him enter the country, you invoked the Fifth Amendment. Number 5. When asked if you committed tax fraud by filing joint returns with a man you weren't married to, while legally married to your brother, you invoked the Fifth Amendment. Number 6. You admitted your campaign paid your husband's firm nearly $3 million. When asked if you were having an affair with him during those payments, you invoked the Fifth Amendment. Number 7. You admitted to making air quotes when describing Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, designated enemies of the United States. Number 8. When asked if you have honored your oath to defend the Constitution against those enemies, you invoked the Fifth Amendment. Number 9. You admitted, under oath, that you rejected over $14,000 in charitable aid for your own grandmother because it came from political opponents. Kennedy looked up from the list. That is quite a morning, Ms. Omar. He picked up a heavy, cream-colored envelope embossed with the seal of the United States Senate. Based on this testimony, Kennedy announced formally, this committee is hereby making the following referrals. To the Department of Justice. We are referring the record of this hearing for a formal criminal investigation into potential immigration fraud and marriage fraud. To the Internal Revenue Service. We are referring your tax filings from 2009 to the present for a criminal audit regarding fraudulent joint filings and unreported income. To the Federal Election Commission, we are referring the payments to the E Street Group for investigation of conversion of campaign funds for personal use. To the House Committee on Ethics, we are sending a recommendation for immediate censure and a review for potential expulsion based on conduct unbecoming a member of Congress. And to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, we are referring your refusal to affirm your oath of allegiance for a counterintelligence review regarding your security clearance. Kennedy dropped the envelope onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Omar's hands. She didn't touch it. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. Ms. Omar, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. Do you have anything to say? Remembering, of course, that you are still under oath? Omar looked at her attorneys. They were packing their briefcases, their faces grim. They knew the legal battle had just shifted from containment to survival. They shook their heads at her. Don't say a word. She turned back to the microphone, her face pale, stripped of the defiance she had worn 4 hours ago. I have nothing further to say at this time, she whispered. Kennedy nodded slowly. In 40 years of practicing law, Kennedy said, I've seen a lot of witnesses. I've seen innocent ones, and I've seen guilty ones. The innocent ones scream the truth from the rooftops. They fight. They argue. They answer every question because they have nothing to hide. The guilty ones? Kennedy paused. The guilty ones plead the Fifth. You have pleaded the Fifth Amendment 37 times today, Ms. Omar. Kennedy looked directly into the camera lens, addressing the millions of Americans he knew would be watching. I'm just a country lawyer, Kennedy said one last time. But where I come from, 37 refusals to tell the truth isn't a defense strategy. It's a confession. He picked up his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Omar. All of it. Bang. The sound of the gavel striking the block was sharp and final. Kennedy stood up, buttoned his seersucker jacket, and walked out of the room without looking back. Behind him, Ilhan Omar sat alone at the witness table, surrounded by the wreckage of her career, while the cameras continued to roll, capturing the silence of a woman who had finally run out of words. The hearing didn't just end, it detonated. In the era of 24-hour news cycles, most political events are like fireworks, bright, loud, and gone in seconds. But the Kennedy-Omar hearing was different. It wasn't a soundbite. It was a legal demolition. And because it was broadcast on C-SPAN, unedited and raw, it couldn't be spun. The footage went viral with a speed and intensity that stunned even seasoned political operatives. Within 6 hours, the full video had 42 million views across YouTube, Twitter, X, Facebook, and TikTok. Within 24 hours, that number had climbed to 94 million. By the end of the week, the cumulative views stood at 178 million. To put that in perspective, the average State of the Union address draws about 30 million viewers. A Senate hearing on immigration fraud had drawn nearly 6 times that audience. The phrase 37 times became an instant cultural phenomenon. It was the headline on the Drudge Report. It was the banner on Fox News. Even CNN and MSNBC, which initially tried to downplay the hearing, were forced to cover it as the sheer volume of Fifth Amendment pleas made it impossible to ignore. Pleaded the Fifth 37 times trended on Twitter for 4 straight days. Late-night comedians, usually friendly to progressive causes, couldn't ignore the absurdity. Even Saturday Night Live ran a cold open featuring a skit where a lawyer asked a client if the sky was blue, and the client shouted, "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right." But the meme-ification of the hearing was just the surface. The real impact was happening in the quiet offices of federal agencies. Kennedy's strategy of creating a permanent congressional record proved to be devastatingly effective. 48 hours later, the Department of Justice broke its usual protocol of silence. The Attorney General announced a formal investigation into immigration fraud allegations against Representative Ilhan Omar. The referral from the Senate Judiciary Committee, backed by sworn testimony and 37 refusals to answer, gave the DOJ the political cover it needed. This wasn't a partisan probe, it was a follow-up to a Senate referral. 72 hours later, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division announced a review of tax filings from 2009 to 2017. The specific focus was on the joint returns Kennedy had highlighted. Tax lawyers across the country went on TV to explain that filing jointly with a non-spouse is a slam-dunk felony case. 5 days later, the FBI opened a preliminary inquiry into the national security implications of her testimony. The refusal to affirm her oath, combined with her public statements, triggered an automatic counterintelligence review of her security clearance. The political fallout was catastrophic. Democrats in Congress, who had circled the wagons around Omar during previous controversies, suddenly vanished. Nancy Pelosi, when cornered by reporters, offered a terse, "The Ethics Committee will handle it." Chuck Schumer claimed he hadn't seen the testimony, a lie that fooled no one. The Squad tried to defend her, tweeting about Republican witch hunts, but the ratios were brutal. Every defense was met with a video clip of Omar pleading the Fifth about her brother. The narrative had shifted from victim to suspect. The primary challenger. 3 days after the hearing, a primary challenger emerged in Minnesota's 5th District. He was a Somali-American military veteran named Abdi Malik. He announced his candidacy with a simple, devastating message. I served this country in uniform. I am proud to be an American, and I can answer yes when asked if I honored my oath. In his first week, he raised $6.2 million. It was the fastest fundraising haul for a primary challenger in congressional history. The polling. A local Minneapolis poll released 6 days after the hearing showed Omar's approval rating had collapsed. She went from 54% approval to 19%. Even among Democrats in her district, her support had cratered to 31%. The voters could forgive policy disagreements. They could not forgive 37 Fifth Amendment pleas regarding marriage fraud and national loyalty. The end. 1 week to the day after the hearing, Ilhan Omar called a press conference in Minneapolis. She stood at a podium, looking tired and diminished. There were no lawyers this time. After consultation with my family and legal counsel, she read from a prepared statement, her voice shaking. I have decided to step away from Congress to focus on my family and to address the legal matters that have arisen from last week's hearing. I am resigning my seat, effective in 30 days. She tried to add a line about leaving with her integrity intact, but it was drowned out by the clicking of camera shutters. She took no questions. She walked off the stage, leaving her career behind her. Senator Kennedy's legacy. Senator John Kennedy rarely spoke about the hearing in the months that followed. He returned to his work on the Appropriations Committee, maintaining the low profile of a workhorse senator. But 3 months later, at a town hall in Baton Rouge, a constituent asked him about it. "Senator, how did you know she would crack?" the man asked. "How did you know she would take the fifth?" Kennedy leaned back in his chair, smiling that slow, easy smile. "Well," Kennedy drawled, "my daddy taught me that if you're gonna go bear hunting, you better bring a big gun. And if you're gonna ask questions under oath, you better know the answers before you ask 'em." He took a sip of water. "She thought she was walking into a TV show," Kennedy said. "She thought she could spin it. She thought she could cry racism and make it go away. But the law doesn't care about your feelings. The law cares about the facts." "And the fact is," Kennedy said, his voice hardening, "innocent people don't plead the fifth 37 times." "We just turned on the lights," Kennedy concluded. "She's the one who showed us what was hiding in the dark." The legacy of the hearing was clear. It proved that in an age of noise, spin, and social media outrage, the oldest tool in the book, the sworn oath, was still the deadliest. John Kennedy, the Rhodes Scholar in a seersucker suit, had reminded Washington that the truth is a patient hunter, and eventually it always gets its prey.